Late on July 11th and into the early hours of July 12th, a massive typhoon slammed into China's eastern coastline, and it's already being called one of the strongest storms to hit the country this year. We're talking about Typhoon Bavi, and the scale of what's happening right now is honestly hard to wrap your head around. Before it ever reached the mainland, Bavi had already carved a destructive path across the western Pacific. It brushed past the southern islands of Japan, skimmed close to Taiwan, and then set its sights squarely on China. By the time it made landfall, it wasn't just another passing storm, it was a full-blown emergency. So let's talk numbers for a second. Meteorologists clocked Bavi's sustained winds at roughly 144 kilometers per hour when it came ashore in Zhejiang Province. If you're picturing a quiet coastal region, think again. Zhejiang is one of the most densely populated coastal areas in all of China. That meant this wasn't a storm hitting empty land. It was hitting home to millions of people. And here's the thing about typhoons like this one. The wind is scary, sure, but it's often not the biggest danger. As Bavi pushed inland and started to lose strength, it kept dragging an enormous amount of moisture along with it. That's the real threat. Relentless, drenching rainfall that doesn't care that the wind has died down. Rivers rising, hillsides giving way, streets turning into rivers of their own. That's the second act of a storm like this, and it can be just as deadly as the first. Now, credit where it's due, Chinese authorities didn't wait around. In the days leading up to landfall, Zhejiang Province carried out one of the biggest evacuation operations anywhere in the world this year. We're talking about more than 1.7 million people moved out of harm's way, away from flood zones, storm surge areas, landslide-prone hillsides, and anywhere winds were expected to hit hardest.
满地苍蝇，还好没有什么大的事情了。看，我的车停在这里，没有被树砸到，还好。哎呀。
And it wasn't just Zhejiang. Shanghai and Fujian Province also went into full preparation mode. Officials relocated residents out of high-risk neighborhoods, positioned rescue teams on standby, and braced for whatever the storm might throw at them next. Along the coastline, the scene was intense. Waves crashed against the shore with real force, and emergency crews were out checking flood barriers, seawalls, and other critical infrastructure to make sure it could hold. Fishing boats were called back to port. Maritime traffic in several areas was shut down entirely. Nobody wanted vessels caught out at sea when conditions turned dangerous. The disruption didn't stop at the coastline either. Airports across eastern China canceled or rescheduled hundreds of flights as the storm closed in. Train services were suspended or scaled back on a number of routes. Ferries stopped running. Schools shut their doors, and outdoor activities across the region were called off, all in the name of keeping people safe. Even Shanghai, one of the biggest cities on the planet, wasn't taking any chances. City officials moved thousands of residents out of vulnerable areas and had emergency response teams standing by, ready to react to flooding or wind damage the moment it happened. Public transportation was watched closely, and residents were urged again and again, stay home, avoid unnecessary travel, and don't underestimate this storm. Here's something worth understanding about how typhoons actually behave once they hit land. The wind usually starts to fade pretty quickly, but that doesn't mean the danger is over. The storm's circulation can keep pulling in moisture and dumping it hundreds of kilometers from where the storm first made landfall. So even after the headlines move on, communities further inland can still be dealing with flooding days later. And that's exactly what officials are bracing for now. As Bavi continues to weaken over land, meteorologists are warning that the rain isn't finished yet. Regions further from the coast are still at serious risk, especially as rivers swell and the ground becomes so saturated it simply can't absorb any more water. Behind the scenes, emergency teams are working non-stop, inspecting reservoirs, checking drainage systems, monitoring rivers, and going over transportation infrastructure with a fine-tooth comb. Firefighters, medical crews, and disaster response units are all on standby, ready to move the moment they're needed, whether that's for flooding, landslides, damaged roads, or power outages. Officials are being very clear with the public right now. Stay away from rivers, steer clear of coastal areas, avoid mountain slopes, and never try to drive through a flooded road. And maybe the most important reminder of all, just because the worst of the wind has passed doesn't mean the danger has. Heavy rain can keep causing serious problems long after a storm technically ends. Unfortunately, Typhoon Bavi isn't an isolated event. It's just the latest in a string of intense weather systems that have battered parts of Asia this summer, and it's a pretty stark reminder of how extreme these weather patterns have become.
Teams on standby.
As for what's next, the storm itself is expected to keep losing strength over the coming days, but that doesn't mean the story is over. Recovery efforts, damage assessments, and cleanup operations are just getting started, and they're likely to continue for quite a while. Right now, the focus for Chinese authorities is still squarely on evacuations, emergency response, and protecting the infrastructure that communities depend on. A full nationwide picture of casualties and economic damage hasn't been released yet. Local officials say more details will come as inspections and recovery work move forward. We'll be keeping an eye on this story as it develops, so if you want updates as more information comes in, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next video.